joining us for this session presented by IPPR Scotland. My name is Dave Hawkey. I'm Senior Research Fellow here at IPPR Scotland. And this session is to talk about GB energy and more broadly the sort of the energy transition and what it means for Scotland. We have a very exciting panel to join us in this discussion. On my right here we have Stephen Flynn, MP, leader of the SNP in Westminster. I'm sure we don't need any more introduction to Stephen Flynn. Sitting next to Stephen, we have Holliday, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Community Energy Scotland, which is sort of the membership organisation for community energy projects across Scotland. And then at the end of the panel, we've got Damien Zachlod, who is the Managing Director of EnBW. EnBW is a publicly owned energy company owned in Germany, but one of the largest energy companies in Europe, and has a pipeline of projects, including 6 gigawatts of offshore wind sort of in development in the UK. So we're here to talk about GB energy and the energy transition. So whilst Scotland, we have a great story to tell in terms of renewables. Renewables now make up 70% of electricity generation. There's still a lot more to be done, and this is coming from various directions. So at the UK level, the UK government has a target of clean power by 2030, which is driving sort of acceleration across the UK. But in Scotland, we've also got the great potential of the ScotWind projects that will come on stream during the 2030s. And this expansion in clean power is really important, not just because we're moving fossil power off the electricity system, but we need that growth in clean power to support decarbonisation across the economy, particularly across heat and transport. So with all of this change that's happening, this is leading to sort of various developments across the energy sector. And so we're here to talk about some of those and what they mean for Scotland. So there's sort of institutional change, and one of the big changes, or sort of presented as a big change, is the introduction of GB energy. So GB energy is a publicly owned energy company, meaning that in that sort of investment space there is a publicly owned actor. But is GB energy doing the right kind of thing? What other things can we learn about the role of ownership in the energy sector, and what that might mean for development in Scotland and the wider impacts, particularly the sort of industrial impacts that we might want to see from the development of renewables. So, got quite a broad set of topics. In terms of how we'll run the session, I'll ask the panel members to give some opening reflections. Then we'll open up for a bit of discussion, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions to come from this very full audience. So glad to have you all here with us. So we actually didn't discuss beforehand who wants to go first.
Let's see if Damien raises his hand.
Okay, Damien.
It's good. I think sometimes it's easier to go first. But if you want me to go open up, no problem. So just a quick introduction for everybody. EnBW, as we've been discussed here with Dave, we're a state-owned utility in Germany. We're 100 years old. It's sort of pretty much full public ownership. We consider ourselves long-term patient capital, so we sort of take a longer-term view of things, and we have sort of real cross-industry. We're the last fully integrated utility in Europe now. So we have transmission grids, distribution grids, and then right through generation, customer business offering gas, water, Wi-Fi. So we do a little bit of everything. As a business, we're very committed to the energy transition, and we aim to be climate neutral by 2035. And one of the big topics we have there, which may come up, is we are committed to closing our coal power plants by 2028, with a commitment to have zero redundancies through that process. So that's something that we feel very strongly about. With regards to GB energy, we consider ourselves as maybe a helpful case study, I guess. You know, we've grown through a number of mergers of various state-owned municipal energy companies. But as part of that, we did a piece of work this year with the IPPR, to look at GB energy and some of the ideas and things that people might look at. With regards to specifically for Scotland, as EnBW, we're here with a 3 gigawatt offshore wind farm under development in Morven. It's part of the ScotWind Award from 2022. It's 60 kilometres off the coast here in Aberdeen, out of the field of vision, I'm told. So in case anybody's too upset with wind farms, I think Donald Trump's not in the audience. But largely speaking, what does that mean realistically? 3 gigawatts. It means that when the wind farms are complete, we'll have enough clean, homegrown power for 3 million households. So that's largely one of the key messages. We have a project office in Edinburgh, and the capital investment for our Morven offshore wind farm is expected to be in excess of 8 billion, and we have pre-commitments to do up to 1.1 billion of that 8 billion here in Scotland. We consider offshore wind a real opportunity for Scotland, and I think the SNP do too, having awarded ScotWind. But what does Scotland have? It has a lot of coastline, it has good wind speeds, it has supportive topography, it has oil and gas skills, it has real offshore engineering skills. So I think, largely speaking, this is a really good place to do offshore wind. There's been a BVG Associates have done a report where they've looked at the opportunity for Scotland being up to 4.6 billion a year of capital investment coming into Scotland, creating up to 34,000 jobs, and sort of 1.2 billion of gross economic value add to Scotland. So it's really sort of a positive opportunity, and we start to see in the offshore wind field some positive examples of this. There's been an announcement by Sumitomo to invest in NIG for a cable factory, and now just recently, in the last couple of days, there's been an announcement from Mingyang to look at a turbine factory in RC. So I think we start to see in Scotland the fruits. There are challenges that can slow this down, and just very quickly, the first one is grid connection delays. We've had Scotland, we've had our project in Morven since 2022. We still don't have firm grid connection offers, so this is something that slows us down. It stops us really engaging meaningfully with the supply chain, and what that means is that we're falling behind in a world where there are heavy supply chain constraints. Particularly, the whole of Europe and almost all of the world seems to have 2030 or 2035 targets. So there's a lot of people out there trying to develop offshore wind and other renewables. And what we see is, as an example, very cast iron example, Morven is far from shore, so it will have an HV direct current connection. And right now, it's 6 gigawatts, 6 years plus time to try and procure those assets. And let's be clear, the 6 gigawatts starts from the point where we are sure that we can build the project and can make financial close. So it can be a long way into the future. The third part, and maybe it'll come up a bit later, is we start to see sort of public perception and sort of the political context. Obviously, we have both Reform and Conservatives coming out talking against the Climate Change Act, and I would say, from as a German utility, this is a question that comes from Germany. So what's the political consensus breaking down? What might happen? Richard Tyson threatened to tear up the CFDs, the real routes to market for these types of projects, and all told, it's just another uncertainty to be dealt with. My quick comment on that is I think we need, as a group, government and industry, we need to make sure that heavy infrastructure is not going to become the next culture. So we need to try and work, and that means that, really speaking, we need to find a way that people feel the cost benefits of renewable energy, and that we're able to make a better case around sort of like the jobs that are being invested, the investments, and the positive impact on people's lives of that. And I will hand back to.
Thanks very much, Damien. Now, hand over to you, Zoe, for some concluding comments.
So my name's Zoe, I'm the CEO at Community Energy Scotland. So we represent more than 400 groups across Scotland who are taking forward their own energy projects, whether that's taking forward their own wind farms, heat projects, transport projects, and so on. I think from the community energy perspective, we're kind of cautiously optimistic about GB Energy in the fact that I think there's two kind of focuses that have really had a benefit for us. Firstly, for many years it was quite common to open up a policy document and stakeholders and kind of, you know, in the transition, whether that's as actual energy users themselves, because many communities across Scotland have their own assets, have their own halls, etc., or as active participants. And I think that the focus on GB Energy, one of its kind of key pillars is on local and community energy. And so for that has kind of brought us into the conversation, and that is very positive. There's still, as I said, we're cautiously optimistic. There are still kind of concerns about how exactly that looks, but at least there's a recognition that communities are important. I think the other thing from a Scottish perspective is that Scotland's part of the conversation by the fact that GB Energy is bizarrely UK-wide, not GB-wide. You know, suddenly as Community Energy Scotland, we're now able to participate in conversations that we weren't before. I mean, even there was a Community Energy contact group that I was only allowed to be an observer on until this year because it was considered to be an English group, whereas now it's considered to be across. And it's been a very positive change as well by having a Scottish energy minister as well. I think has made a huge impact on that as well. So I think that you know, when we think about kind of the overarching vision, I think that it's really positive that there's an 8 gigawatt target by 2030 on community and local energy, and that is not very far away. So that means that we need to be coming in and finding those places for communities to have a stake in the transition, and that links in and gives support to the Scottish Government's existing target, which is also for 2 gigawatts by 2030. So there's a real opportunity for the kind of two governments to work together to achieve both of their goals. Community energy also has a huge opportunity to kind of address what Damien was talking about in terms of public perception. In general, people are not against renewables. What they are against is being exploited and the natural environment being exploited. And what we find is that there is significantly higher support for community energy projects than there is for privately owned projects. Recent polling kind of put it at sort of 62% versus 40%, and also more than 50% of people in a recent Highlands Islands Enterprise survey said that they were looking or interested in taking forward their own projects. So we need to create an opportunity in this renewables transition for communities to have a real and genuine stake, and not be talking about just about kind of generic community benefits. Not talk about taking people with us because, as someone said to me recently, it sounds like they're being taken hostage, but actually about having a real, genuine partnership and recognising the strength of communities, recognising the, you know, that actually this changes people's perceptions. And there's a lot of studies from other countries that show that where communities are genuinely involved in a project, there's much lower levels of objections at planning stages and so on. So this will actually speed up the transition. And I think, you know, when we think about what the benefits look like, I see colleagues from Shetland in the front row here. You know, when we look at the one example in Shetland, the Viking wind farm, which is now the most productive wind farm in the UK, that is 100 times the size of a community-owned project, the Garth wind farm on the Yell Island in Shetland, and they yearly provide the same amount of benefits to the community. So that small community turbine wind farm, is giving the same amount of money to that small island in Yell as the Viking wind farm is paying out to the entirety of the Shetland Islands. And I think when you look at that scale of difference, that's when we realise how important it is that we are making that stake. There's plenty of challenges for community energy, as there are with all renewables, but particularly in terms of getting access to the grid being kind of prioritised. And because, you know, if you're a community, you can only be looking at looking at projects really in your local areas. You can't take that kind of opportunistic look at where you can be developing all over the country. Also in terms of planning, supply chain. But I think, you know, the big opportunity here is for us to just really be giving more opportunities to communities across the country. And I'll leave it there.
Very much.
Yes, thank you. I thought I'd let Damien and Zoe go first so that I can have a final word. But what I didn't factor into that was that Zoe was going to talk about the Garth wind farm and the Viking wind farm, which are a very good place to start because they do offer that juxtaposition of scale but community benefit. I was up in Yale very recently and was able to talk with those in the local community about the magnificent impact they've been able to have on the local community throughout some pretty challenging times because of the quantum or the money that's came in. And then you obviously go and see the Viking wind farm, which is absolutely enormous. And the cables, the HVDC cables, run straight to the mainland. And 25% of the population are living in fuel poverty. And you can understand why people are frustrated and they're angry by what they see in that context. There is an underpinning of that, which is a lot to do with the CFD, which both were able to access, which frees up money in comparison to the cost of delivering the project. And that's a point that government needs to reflect upon quite heavily, because that's the thing which is driving a lot of the focus right now in the offshore and in the onshore wind industry is the cost of projects. And CFDs have been able to unlock the delivery of projects and have provided that mechanism for projects to be taken forward. But when we add in the likes of TNUOS, when we add in the inflationary costs that we've seen, the difficulties connected to the grid and the impact that has upon investor certainty, the access to basic requirements like port infrastructure and jackets, where we're in a very globally competitive environment. All of these things just increase costs, and you need a government policy and direction which helps to mitigate the impact of some of that. Now, sitting off the coast here, I mentioned yesterday at a separate event, is 70% of Scotland, within 100 miles of Aberdeen's coastline. So I like to talk about this, I like to think about this, because it affords our city, our region, and Scotland as a nation a huge opportunity, an opportunity to really capture the imagination of the public, but also to deliver good skills and good jobs for our economy going forward. It equates, if I recall correctly, to some 4,600 turbines, which are going to be placed in the not too far from Aberdeen's coast. And the scale of that is going to require something like 10 to 20 turbines being put up on a daily basis in order to meet our requirements. We're nowhere near delivering that right now, absolutely nowhere near delivering that. But that is the scale of the opportunity which is at our fingertips, and that's something which has to excite us as we talk about the energy transition. In that context, GB Energy has been created. GB Energy is it's interesting. Dan McGrail, who's the chief exec, threw me under the bus at an event recently because he said that I'd said to him, which I had indeed said to him, how dare he use my words against me in such a public forum. He said that I said to him that GB Energy was one of the most popular policy announcements of the last 30, 40, 50 years, and that's entirely accurate. All polling would tell you that's the case. What Dan didn't finish the sentence was that the reason it was so popular was because it meant all things to all people. It was, on one hand, it's going to be Vattenfall and Statkraft, and on the other hand, it's going to reduce bills by £300. Those two things can't be true at the same time, given the quantum money which sits behind it, the 8.6 billion, a third of which has already been diverted to nuclear projects in England. 800 million or so has been directed to solar panel developments on schools and hospitals in England, a very noble cause, and there's money allocated within GB Energy for community projects as well, which is incredibly important. But where that leaves GB Energy is in an almost impossible position right now of trying to deliver upon the expectations of everyone without the full sum of money that they thought was going to be available in a policy and political landscape where they potentially only have 2 or 3 years to deliver, and they have a political headwind which is pretty bleak right now, and politicians in Westminster who sit behind me and to the right hand side of me who would either sell off GB Energy in the case of the Tories were to be making money, or would scrap it entirely in the case of reform. So the ability to deliver in that environment for them is not something which I'm envious of. I think Jürgen and Dan are very well-intended, good individuals who I've got a lot of time for, and I think we have a lot of shared aspirations in terms of what could be achieved. But they have a very challenging situation ahead of them. They also have the minor issue of the fact that they promised to put their headquarters in my constituency, and I can't find it anywhere, which I'm sure. But the final point I wish to say, because there's maybe a little bit too much doom and gloom in that context, the scale of the opportunity, the scale of the investment that could be coming into our ports, that could be coming into our communities, that could ultimately lead to a reduction in energy bills in Scotland is enormous. We just need to make sure that we harness that and we get on with delivering it. And if we do that, then we're going to be doing well.
Thank you very much. So I think we've got quite a lot of people in the room, so probably sort of people champing at the bit, I can see, to ask some questions. So I think we'll go straight into questions to open it up. So, okay, so, well, I'm not going to take two from the front row. So we'll have one here. Okay, you're a different front row, so we'll take them in groups of three. So 1, 2, and 3 at the back would be great. Thank you.
Gary Robinson, Deputy Leader of Shetland Lands Council, and I have to say we're proud to have both the Gaff wind farm and the Viking wind farm in Shetland, and as you say, opposite ends of the same scale, but that's money that's flowing into the islands. I just wanted to ask what effort, if any, is going into further devolving the powers of the Electricity Act to Scotland, because that seems to be something that would answer some of the questions, at least, that your colleagues on the panel here have, or is that something that can only come with independence?
Thank you very much.
So mine is particularly for Stephen, kind of adding a little bit to what you're talking about GB Energy and it being in Aberdeen. He's concerned that it's headquartered in Aberdeen in name only, but not actually in practice. What with the CEO being in Manchester, and I'm a journalist for National, but we got some figures that found that only 18% of jobs currently are even in Aberdeen, and less than 50% are even in Scotland at all. There are more jobs in London than there are in the entirety of Scotland. So you're worried that this is not it's not headquartered in Scotland, let alone even Aberdeen.
All right. Thanks very much. And the question at the back.
Hi, my name's Karen Ball. I'm from the UK Biogas Association. Just a quick question. We've got a biogas plant sitting out there in the car park producing energy, which is powering the lights in this room right now.
I voted for it to be delivered as well.
Thank you very much. I just wondered what we think about a kind of holistic-based solution to using green molecules and green electrons to make sure that we're getting the value for industry and for homes out of all of the available technologies.
Great, thanks very much. So we've got 3 really good questions there. The question about further devolution to Scotland, I suppose lurking within that as well, there are questions about how well the two governments are working together. Obviously, a lot of this cuts across reserve and devolved areas. A question about sort of whether it's in Aberdeen only and holistic solutions. I don't know if anybody wants, has anybody got their hand up to go first, or? Yeah.
I could probably take the last question. I'm not sure about the Aberdeen piece.
And
the Energy Act, I'm going to be quite straightforward and say I'm not aware of the details there, so I'm going to skip those two, if that's okay. But I think your conversation around what are we going to do with the overall energy system is where the discussion needs to be. And I think if you start to look at it from Westminster, and I'm not sure how engaged the Scottish Parliament is, but things like the SEP, which is a strategic plan for energy, where it should be built, what types of energy are required. I think this is the spatial plan. I think this is the type of area where this discussion needs to play out. I think largely I would say if we're going to be electrifying things, then we're going to need to do 2 things. One, grow the electricity, which means I'm not here to only talk about offshore wind. I think there is space for all generation types. And the second part is we're going to need to be able to find ways of balancing the electricity demand with the electricity supply. And molecules is one of the answers for that. So I don't think, I don't know the economics of molecules. I'm not sure where biogas is on the cost base, etc. But at least I'm not one of these people that would lobby one way or the other. I think it is a question of and. Otherwise, we're not going to hit what we need to do for net zero.
So I don't know if you
Yeah,
have.
sure. I think, I would just agree agree in general that I think one of the flaws of GB Energy is it is so focused right now on electricity generation, and that's the kind of, you know, the targets are all just about electricity generation. And I do think that while things like the REST and the SSCP are good steps, I do think that there is a real need for us to be considering everything as a whole, and that we're so looking at transport, looking at heat, looking at the rise of data centres. You know, like these are all really important things, and we can't just kind of, you know, I've been in a lot of very frustrating meetings where half of the room is saying we haven't got enough grid to upgrade, you know, for us to generate, and the other half of the room saying we can't put in heat pumps because we haven't got enough grid, and you just feel like there's something going wrong with this system here. So I think yeah, a holistic way forward is very much needed, and I think that's probably a gap that GB Energy hasn't really filled right now. In terms of devolving powers, I know there is a kind of motion tomorrow, but I think that I would agree, not even so much on a kind of independence perspective, but I think it is very confusing right now with energy that half of things are devolved, half aren't. I mean, I'm still waiting. I've been waiting for 4 months for a question like to be answered as to whether a problem that's being faced in England is actually relevant to Scotland or not. And that, going back to that community energy contact group that I said I was only allowed to observe, it was very frustrating because while community energy itself is devolved, so much of what affects community energy is not devolved, and I think actually if everything was devolved it would make life an awful lot simpler. So that just from a practicality perspective, I think it would make a lot of sense if it was all.
Yeah. To the last question first, and just a wee anecdote. When this place was first opened, we were one of the first people to come in after COVID, because the council happened to open it, and then obviously COVID struck, which was not ideal. And we came in and we made a big play of the fact that we were in a net zero facility, and there was a certain newspaper, if I recall correctly, that said that the SNP conference was powered by hot air and a particular type of gas, which I'll not say because there's a camera on and I'll get caught down. I'm sure you can all use your imagination. Look, I think it's an all energy system within reason. I'm not a supporter of nuclear facilities in Scotland. I don't think it's required, and I don't think the economics make sense. I've had a robust conversation with many people in Westminster in this context. We are going to require baseload, but I'm not sure that the baseload requirement needs to be met by facilities which in their cost far exceed the offshore wind potential that we're talking about, and onshore wind potential, and pumped storage, and green hydrogen. So I think our focus is best laid in that direction. When it comes to the devolution of the Electricity Act, there's probably more chance of me brushing my hair tomorrow than that actually happening. I don't see Westminster in the space of wanting to have those conversations. However, what I am comforted by, and what I think is very important, and I'll actually, I agree with you here that I think Michael Shanks, as Energy Minister, has certainly had a very positive role to play. I don't think Andrew Bowie will be happy with the fact that he's almost forgotten about as a Scottish Energy Minister. Probably deserves. I think from what I know of the relationship that Michael's built with Gillian and with Kate, it has been very good, because ultimately, given the constitutional framework within which we sit, we need these projects to be happening at pace and at scale, and that is ultimately going to happen if we work together. And I don't think either government can choose to be a barrier to investment, because the consequences will be felt by all of us, from the public and rightly so. When it comes to GB Energy, I might say something moderately contentious here. I don't care where Jurgen lives. If Jurgen wants to live in Manchester or wants to live in the Bahamas, that's not an issue. I care about delivery, and I care about whether GB Energy is going to meet its aims as outlined by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, which was to reduce people's energy bills by £300 and to help develop industry. As I understand it, what we're going to see from GB Energy is an attempt to partner with projects which are relatively mature in terms of their process towards being delivered, and I say partner, that will take a stake, and as such will perhaps seek to provide investors with some confidence that those projects have the backing of an entity which is ultimately tied to the UK government, and those projects will then be able to be taken forward. forward, and as such they'll be able to claim credit for the supply chain jobs and so on and so forth that come with that. The problem they have in that context is that the public aren't that high, and energy bills are still not going to be down by £300. And this is the problem that Jurgen and Dan face, is that no matter how well intentioned their arguments are, they're constrained by the fact that promises have been made to the public, and those promises are not going to be kept in advance of the next electoral test that the government face next year, and indeed the next general election that we're going to face. And when they go into that election, I hate to say it, but I think net zero is going to be a cultural battleground. I don't think it should be. I think far from it. I think that the individuals, well, as Richard Tice saying, he'd wrap up not just future auction rounds contracts and CFDs, but those which are already being signed for projects which are already underway, is an enormous threat to Scotland. I think we underestimate the scale of that threat, because that will be felt by the supply chain and by workers in Scotland very acutely, and will ultimately be felt by consumers as well, because it will just mean that we are importing even more energy than what we already do, and that's a threat that we need to be very much aware of. But it's not just a threat that's posed by reformers, or a threat that's now posed by the Tories. The only difference between the Tories and reformers, the Tories seem to like carbon storage still, whereas Reform don't. But otherwise, their policy prospectus when it comes to renewables is very much aligned. And in my view, that's a threat to the opportunity which exists for investors, but also the opportunity which exists for Scotland and all of us in this room.
Just before we sort of open up some more questions, on this question about sort of ownership and public ownership, is GB Energy the only game in town, or are there sort of other models of public ownership that we should be thinking about that might sort of suit a different sort of scale, something that might happen at a Scotland level or local authority level? I don't know if people have thoughts about where else we can go with public ownership.
Yeah, so I mean the target is for local and community owned energy. We've been asking for that to be split out, to be very clear of what that means and what local means and what community owned means, because the example in Scotland of the Scottish target, the majority of what is counted as community and local energy currently are privately owned estates and farms, which we wouldn't really consider to be community ownership. But I do think there is a really big opportunity for local authorities to take forward their own projects. There are multiple local authorities that have done so, and that has in turn its own benefits in terms of building up the supply chain in different areas, in terms of bringing down the costs for local authorities, which then in turn means that they can pass on and improve local services and kind of address their own black holes. But what we wouldn't want to see is kind of communities be edged out in that process. So I think there's two different things there, and there's also a lot of opportunities I think for some partnerships between community groups and local authorities. So I think that's an area that I think we will start to see more and more projects coming forward. I know there are definitely a number of examples already.
Damien, I don't know if there's anything we can learn from German experience.
Yeah, I'm going to offer a slightly different. I think I'm going to offer a slightly different perspective to the question, because I would say from our perspective, we're as I said, we're a 100-year-old state-owned utility. We formed by the coming together of lots of regional utilities. So for us, it's happened a little bit by accident. It's something that could feed into this, in as far as our ownership model has sort of two levels of public ownership. We have the states of Baden-Württemberg owning around 45–46% of the business, and below that we have another 45–46% owned by municipalities. So there's something which could help GB Energy get firmer roots, because it would be harder to break up with different elections, different politics, and also as a certain element of devolving GB Energy from an ownership perspective, which might be able to help fit. Because the story I always like to tell at these type of panel events is, Baden-Württemberg is the home of the car industry in Germany, and there was a large issue with the move from petrol vehicles to EVs, and for Baden-Württemberg, for EnBW, there were questions and discussions with the state around how do we unlock this piece of nobody wants an EV until the right charging infrastructure is there, and therefore we were able to, with our long-term patient capital approach, not needing returns tomorrow, we were able to unlock and make the investments that have given us the largest Central European EV charging network. And that's obviously a sort of a forward-looking investment, which is helping to drive other business opportunities. And I just use that as a topic of different ways a public sector company can assist in this discussion?
Yeah, like I think there's a place for both, but I think we also need to be conscious, very conscious of scale. I was in an event just last week in the Bowden floating fixed bottom offshore wind farm proposal, which is at a relatively early stage in terms of where they're seeking to be in the years to come. They've taken quite a novel approach to what they're intending to do by bringing together the supply chain relatively early to see how they can operate in practice to deliver, rather than doing it the other way around and saying we have a project, then going out to try and find the supply chain. I think that gives me a lot of confidence that those who are taking forward, certainly the Scotland licensing round, are certainly looking at how we maximise Scottish content in a really positive way, and that's something that we should all welcome. But the numbers that we're talking about in relation to delivering one of these projects, and Bowden's a relatively small one in comparison to some of those which have licensing granted, is billions of pounds, and there is a limit as to the role that communities can play in that context, and there's certainly a limit as to the role that the government can play in that context, and ultimately it is going to be foreign direct investment primarily, or pension funds perhaps from within the UK as well, which can play a role to deliver them. But I think we need to separate out the scale with the deliverability. Where we would want to see communities be able to take things forward is certainly, and I'll refer back to Garth from Yale here as an example, a project of a relatively small scale, albeit they're going to have to replace their turbines in the not too distant future and going through that process, as I understand it just now, to see what they can do. But that all comes back to one, not just cost, but two, an adequate grid connection, and three, a policy and financing framework which allows the communities to get on and do what it is that they need to do. Putting those three things and others together is really not easy in this fiscal environment, and it's certainly not easy when we consider the scale of the transformation that we're needing to see to the grid across these entire isles in order to meet what's coming on the stream. I mean, even the likes of Garth, for want of labouring the point, if they're going to put in place larger turbines, that means it's going to be producing more electricity, which the grid then needs to take into account, and there's a cost on both sides for delivery of that. Now that shouldn't be a limit to the ambition of that project. We should be in a position where we can accommodate these things, but we're not there yet. And this is where I would just put a polite plea that when we're talking about the energy transition, we need to understand that this is complex. We need to understand that this is taking a little bit longer than people perhaps initially anticipated, and as such we need to make sure that the jobs of the people who are currently within the energy industry right now, who will hopefully be able to transfer into the industries of tomorrow, need to be protected to ensure that those people can deliver those projects in the next 5, 10, 15 years and beyond, to let us decarbonise our economy and have economic growth here in Scotland and be that exemplar across the world, which I think we can be. And just very briefly, because I'm talking far too much, when I go and speak to ambassadors from across the world in London, the first thing they want to talk about is Scotland's renewables opportunity, particularly those on the continent, because energy security is absolutely vital. And whilst we talk about our own energy security, we should not be shy or ashamed about the fact that our energy security is intrinsically linked to the energy security of our friends on the European continent, who right now don't have energy security in many respects as a result of what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And we need to have that unity of ambition and that unity of purpose to protect both ourselves and our friends. We have a key role to play in that, both in terms of electricity production, but also in the future green hydrogen production.
Thanks very much. Open up for another round of questions. Okay, we'll take another front row line behind. So the gentleman there and then the lady sitting behind him.
So Neil Grant, Shelby Islands Council. One of the things that would really make life better in Shetland is an energy tariff. So people in Shetland that are paying, the average house cost in Shetland is about £4,000 compared to about 2,000 in the Netherlands. Doing something about that, being able to do something like that would have a much bigger impact and get the community on board. At the moment, it really feels some battleground. Your points are really well made. At this moment in time, in a place like Shetland, there is real pushback. We've got 3 gigawatts of future power projects, and at the moment, the community are really railing against them.
Thank you. Gentleman.
Thank you. In terms of the base load worries that have been expressed vis-à-vis nuclear, why on earth are we not putting public money into third stage development of the Pentland First tidal array? Now that's been talked about, as far as I know, for the last 50 years. And it keeps on getting jump-started and so on, and then it fizzles out again. That's my question.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And then the lady behind.
Yeah. I'm a councillor in Midlothian, and we have Vattenfall and our energy plan. But I'm really interested to hear more about the community partnerships and how communities can make money from their own energy plants and so that's one question. When nuclear comes on board, so we've got Hinkley Point and we've got the other one, Sizewell and all that, when they come on board, is our renewable energy, is that going to be looked on as sort of subsidiary then? And how do we secure that the jobs that are coming are going to be Scottish jobs and not, the high-level Scottish jobs are going to be Scottish jobs and not brought in from elsewhere?
Great, thank you very much. So there's quite a lot there. Question about sort of energy tariffs and protection of generation. This question about the Pentland Firth array, which might also sort of open up some more questions about there are still sort of innovative energy technologies that could perhaps be developed, and is there maybe a role for GB Energy there? And then some questions at the back about sort of community partnerships, what implications sort of nuclear development might have and how we capture jobs in Scotland. This time I'm going to not give you the advantage of going last, Steve. I'm going to go to you first and then we'll go through the other.
Look, in respect of the tariff aspect, I completely understand that, and I completely understand that frustration. It's an inequity which exists, that there is so much power being generated in an area of such a small populace, and yet there's no obvious benefit to the individuals who live there. If I may extend that out though, Scotland produces 6 times more gas than it consumes, and 70% of our electricity comes from renewable sources. So I think all of us should be questioning why we are such an energy-rich nation, and so many of our people are living in fuel poverty, and why we're not able to maximise that energy production in order to attract businesses and then therefore grow our economy. 25% of Ireland's electricity right now is being swallowed up by data centres. They're looking at all manner of ways to try and accelerate renewables production to directly feed the data centres of today and the AI data centres of tomorrow in order to keep the growth that they've had in their economy going, the budget surplus of the tens of billions of pounds that they have to throw about at this moment in time, the sovereign wealth fund that they're creating as a result of that. My question is, why is Scotland not asking to have the exact same position? Why are we not getting these businesses into Scotland? Only 5, if I remember correctly, 5 gigawatts of NESO's plans is for green hydrogen in Scotland. I remember sitting having a conversation with them and feeling like, oh great, you've tapped us on the head and said, there you go, there's a little bit of your electricity back for you to go and do what you want to do. Nah, we should be the ones who decide what it is we're doing.
As has been done with methane for many, many years now, hydrogen molecules like to escape them, so these things obviously need to be looked at in good detail. We're far enough away in the conversation to not have to worry about that baseload requirement right now, but we need to have an answer and a solution to that. The fortunate thing, the beautiful thing, is there's a number of examples of Scotland's domestic resources, which would allow us to do that without having to worry about nuclear power. And that takes me very nicely onto the final point in relation to nuclear and the tens of billions of pounds of subsidies that are flowing into that in contrast to other developing industries. I understand from a UK government perspective why they might seem to go down that route because of the lack of indigenous energy production that they have. And maybe there's a fear in the back of their mind that if Scotland goes, they're going to have to find some electricity tonto to meet their own energy security requirements. But that investment can't be at the expense of other things. And that's where my frustration with what's happening with GB Energy sits, because a third of the money that was allocated is going straight to nuclear projects elsewhere. That's not what was promised. It went from £28 billion, £8.6 billion, and 2.5 of that is going to nuclear projects, just as we want pre-election it would. I think we should be demanding better and making sure, as you say, that the projects which are developed in Scotland are for Scotland. We have that domestic manufacturing where it's possible, because it's not going to be possible with everything, developed as quickly as possible.
So I don't know if you want to pick up the community partnerships or any of the other points.
Yeah, sure. I'll kind of go to a couple of things. Firstly, I think in terms of the kind of energy tariffs in Shetland, yeah, I mean, it's a really common issue that we hear, and I think it comes from us being in an outdated energy system that is assuming that the energy is coming from the centre and going outwards, and actually we've kind of turned it around now. And I think we just need to kind of readdress what it looks like and also break the link between electricity and fossil fuel prices, which doesn't make any sense in making heat pump really hard to kind of stack up right now. So, but I think one kind of glint of hope is the fact that we're expecting very shortly to see a consultation on P441, which will allow for local energy markets to be produced. So rather than always having to export your electricity to the market and then buy it back again, there'll be the ability to create local energy markets and directly sell to local consumers. So hopefully that might start to kind of create some opportunities in some of the areas that are creating the most. Yeah, I think just a kind of quick, I'm not going to speak specifically to the Pentland for tidal array, but I do think that there is a sort of an issue, you know, as Stephen mentioned earlier, about the fact that kind of GB Energy has been promised to be all things to all people, and I think one of the bad things that they have to trade off is do they go for, with the limited amount of money that's available, tried and tested technologies that can kind of roll out very quickly, or do they invest in kind of more innovative measures, and kind of because there's a real pressure to create a GB Energy that is financially sustainable within a short period of time, and that also has implications on kind of the community side of things, where maybe there's a need for sort of financial support earlier on. How do you make that then stack up in the bigger model? But I do think kind of, yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. I have similar frustrations with knowing that multiple types of kind of technology that could address curtailment have existed for a long time, but are not kind of rolled out. And I think, you know, we need to be thinking about the whole system, as I said earlier. In terms of Midlothian, yeah, I mean, we've got loads of really great examples of how communities are making money from their own energy projects. You know, currently the biggest project in Scotland is Point and Sandwick on the Outer Hebrides, and they generate currently for their community £1 million a year from their turbines. So, you know, there are real opportunities for communities, and the ambitions of the community sector are only getting bigger. So their neighbours, the West Coast Community Energy, are now looking at 50 megawatt wind farm. So that's nearly 10 times the size of the current biggest community energy project. So we can certainly kind of link you up. Feel free to come and chat afterwards about kind of getting some good examples of these. But I think, you know, one of the things that really pushed a lot of these successful projects was the revenue certainty that was available at the time that many of those projects went live, with both kind of feed-in tariffs and renewable obligation certificates. And that's something that we really want to see from the local power plan from GB Energy that's due to be published before Christmas, is some kind of mechanism that is similar to the CFDs, the contract for differences, which give that security to larger scale projects, but with a level of admin that is achievable for kind of communities. So we want to see something that makes a project stack up from the outset, and therefore can attract the investment needed for communities as well as for larger projects. And likewise, we want to see incentives for private developers, that perhaps there's an uplift on those CFDs if there's a meaningful stake for communities involved in the project, so that there's a reason why, other than the kind of public perception and getting people to buy in, there's also sort of reasons for the private developers to actually want to actually
save the day. The coal power station, you could store 6 months worth of coal outside in a big heap. What are we replacing the coal with?
Yeah, okay. That's fantastic, thanks. So we've got a
It's
question
an
here about
investment.
sort of locking in community benefits, and a question here that I might sort of expand out a bit. How well is this kind of system planning sort of process working, so that we can be confident that we're building a system that, you know, we're building it in time and it's going to do what we
mandatory, reporting on community benefits mandatory, and also making shared ownership offers mandatory in all private developments. So we're just awaiting the results of that consultation, but fingers crossed that would be kind of the way forward, is that the UK government would actually go forward and actually implement that. But in the meantime, the Scottish government consulted on the good practice principles to actually look at, are they still up to date, but they're now holding off to wait to see what happens. So we're in a kind of a bit of an interim period right now, but I'm hoping that we'll see much more. Well, firstly, that we'll see mandatory community benefits, but also that we'll see, you know, the advice being stronger as well at the Scottish level. And we also, as an organisation and as part of the Scottish Community Coalition on Energy, have been pushing for an additional, so to have two separate contributions, one for the local community and one for a Scottish community wealth fund, similar to the kind of sovereign wealth funds that we see in other countries, to make sure that it is genuinely a just transition across the whole of Scotland, that everyone has the opportunity to access some of these benefits, regardless of whether you are located next to a development or not. In terms of the wider picture about kind of what are we replacing coal with, I mean, I think, you know, there is this kind of strategic